Now, without further ado, I am going to turn it over to our Executive Director, Catherine Kangany, who's going to introduce our host for this evening.
Thank you. It is my pleasure to introduce tonight's speaker, Stacy Fox. And Stacy's love of baking began at the age of 14 when she accepted a temporary position with Siemens. And so, as she likes to say, a short-term job led to a lifetime career. During high school and college, she worked at Marty's Cookies in Birmingham before buying it at the age of 24, and she owned it and worked it for nearly 15 years. She dabbled in cookies on and off until she heard about the Star Bakery being for sale 2 years ago. So she is now president and managing partner, along with Dan Buckfire and David Schechter, who assist in the business. And Dan is a former JHSM board member who helped dream up tonight's program. So Dan, thank you very much. We're so glad that you are here tonight. Just months after acquiring Star, the three partners purchased Diamond Bakery. And so, as Stacy says, now the love is doubled. In her new role, she has begun incorporating new, modern Jewish baked goods alongside the traditional ones, and that's what she'll be talking about tonight in a talk called Michigan's Historic Jewish Bakeries. So please join me in welcoming Stacy Fox.
All right, you're good. You don't have to unmute. You're
okay.
Good.
I'm just going to have to fix. Okay. So hi everybody. I'm really looking forward to today. Doing a little technical couple things, and tonight we're going to dive into a deep dive into the Michigan historical bakeries. Started on Hastings Street. Thank you. Started on Hastings Street, where the Jewish bakeries had very humble beginnings, all through the unions, the strikes. There were bombings for bakeries. People are very passionate about their bakeries in Birmingham, and then all the way up to right now and what the future is going to look like. And I always like to say that when you're working in a bakery, you're always warm and you're never hungry. And it is a 24/7 business. We're doing it at Diamond right now because at Star, they are busy making the breads. We have a crew of people there all through the night. And if you recall, the reason why bakeries were so important and always there was that every independent grocer did their own thing. I remember the produce man coming down my street, and I don't feel like I'm that old, but in Oak Park, there was the produce truck that would come down. The chicken man would deliver. You would go to a kosher butcher, and that's exactly what was happening in Detroit. So Black Bottom was bordered, I'm looking at some notes here, by Gratiot, Rush, the Detroit River, and the Grand Trunk railroad stations. And it was called Black Bottom because when the French arrived here, the soil was so dark and so rich. And it was so dark and so rich because the river had been used by a sewer. And then as Black Bottom got built up, the most diverse street was Hastings Street. And Hastings ran 60 blocks long. A lot of people don't realize that. But a lot of the Jewish families lived on Hastings Street. In the 1850s to about 1900, there were roughly 1,000 Jews in Detroit, and they were mostly German Jews, wealthy German Jews. They had money, they lived in two-family homes, often separated homes, and then by 1910, there were 10,000 Jews in Detroit, and 86% of them were Russian Jews. And the Russian Jews really made themselves at home in Black Bottom on that Hastings Street. They would have 3-4 families in a 2-bedroom flat. It was very crowded. It was a very traditional way of living. There was a lot, people talked about they wouldn't wear American clothes. They came over and they really felt protected because they were so used to the shtetls. They really felt protected to keep their traditions alive, even if it was just the clothing that they were wearing. And the Russian Jews were the core Jews. So it seemed like the German Jews were at Grand Circus Park, and the Russian Jews were on the east side of Hastings Street. And there were tons and tons of bakeries. There were Jewish cultural centers, there were synagogues, and of course, where there's all of that, there's going to be lots of Jewish food. So there were Jewish restaurants, but there were probably 20 to 30 bakeries just on Hastings Street alone. And if you think about that, 60 blocks of Hastings, that's a lot of bakeries. And it was also known, as you see on the slide, it was also known as Little Jerusalem. So many Jews that lived there. No one really knows when the very first bakery came to be. Odds are it was people selling things out of their home, or it was people selling things on a cart. But the first brick and mortar that I could find was the Warsaw Bakery. And it was owned by Max Schillinger and M. Steinberg in 1910. And it was said that they broke apart in 1915. Max Schillinger opened Star Bakery, and then in 1916, the Rosen family bought the Warsaw Bakery and continued it from there. And Star opened up with just 4 employees, and they were baking hundreds and hundreds of breads. And then one of my favorite things is 10 years later, roughly 10 years later, they opened up a second bakery, Star did, and the ad for the second bakery is very cute. It was called their New Sanitary Bakery. And I love that. And that was the big one on Dexter. So they had several locations on Dexter. And if you look at the slide, it's just interesting the way, they spelled the Sabbath bread, which was your challah. And it was owned at that time by Fellstadt and Penn. And we're not sure how long they owned that for, but they had opened up a couple locations. And it's just great that they called it their sanitary bakery. So what happened is now you have all these bakers. You have a bakers association. There was no union at this time in Michigan for bakers. And it was called the Jewish Master Bakers Association. And you can see there's a list of bakeries that their bakers were part of it. There were a lot of boycotts. There weren't strikes yet. They were considered the boycotts of the era. And people always thought that they were just, boycotting for better wages. But actually, in this time, the 1910s and 20s, they were really boycotting for safety. There's something called baker's lung, and if there isn't any ventilation in the bakery, flour can lie in your lungs, and a lot of these men got really, really sick. So that's some of the things that they were fighting for. And unfortunately, there were lots of people coming off a boat, coming to Detroit, and the owners were like, if you don't like the conditions, work somewhere else. So very few resolutions were made, and the bakers really didn't get anything that they wanted. And that moves us into one of the big boycotts in 1910. So this bombing happened at Rosen's Bakery. And what happened there was a practice, never stops. There was a practice to have, to sell bread to the wholesalers, and the wholesalers would come back and give the bakeries back their day old bread, and they would get credit for it. So it was no skin off their back if they didn't sell it. But what happened is the bakeries were then either selling the bread to charities or to farms for hog feed, or they were selling them at a discounted price to the poor. Well, finally, during World War I, the Defense Department got involved and said, you can't do it anymore. We're not going to allow this practice, because what's happening is all this flour and wheat for human consumption is being fed to these hogs, and we need it for our soldiers. Well, people who were wholesaling, now if they bought it, they had to keep it. They were not allowed to buy the bread back anymore. There were boycotts, there were protests, and sure enough, one of the bakeries was bombed. They said that at this time, I'm trying to think, there were roughly $10,000 worth of damage. And if you notice, it says he was selling the bread at 5 cents, and Mr. Rosen swears it wasn't 5 cents and he wasn't buying back. And it was so important to stop the buyback, because this was an opportunity for the Jews to look like they were being patriotic, and they were now becoming good Americans. And they weren't all this, these poor huddled masses anymore. These were business owners, and they were good patriotic Americans. It was a great opportunity for them. And so that is like the crazy bombing. There were, 30 police officers were called down to the bakery. People were flooding the streets, and it happened at around midnight. So you can imagine if, a bakery was bombed in Royal Oak or West Bloomfield, people would be a little nervous about that. But then we move into the 1930s. And this is when flour prices fell. And again, they're doing, strikes and boycotts against it. And these poor business owners, because the flour prices fell, all the bakers wanted raises. And the bakers wanted raises, so they went on strike. And the bakery owners kept saying, no, we can't do it. Our overhead's the same, but we're not even making 2 more cents on the flour. We'll lower it 2 cents, but we can't lower it 40%. Actually, the hardest hurdle they had to overcome was the Jewish Communist Society, who wanted them to cut their prices by 40 to 50%. And so finally, they got all the bakers involved, they got all the owners involved, but what really did it was all the housewives and the women who for weeks had to make their own challah for Shabbat. And they were furious. So they actually went down, one of the women supposedly beat up Mrs. Rosen to make sure that she got the message, they had to get their workers back to work. And these women were not going to make their own challah anymore. They came to America, they want to buy their bread now. They're, not these poor immigrants who have to make their own bread. So it was a very big deal. It was a very surprising thing when I came across it, that it was really the women had a big part in ending this. And so they finally went down, and I think they got a 3-cent reduction. So bread was then 12 cents a pound, regardless of how much you bought. So we've come a long way. And one of the slides I wanted to make, and I forgot and didn't get a chance to make, was the cost between what things cost then and what things cost now. So 12 cents for a loaf of bread back then. I mean, it was expensive, probably, but they did a good job in getting it down. So you can see, even at Star, all the bakeries, a lot of them put something out saying, we're back, we're making our breads. You can come. People were coming at all hours. They were almost open 24 hours a lot of times. And then as we move into the 40s, we're getting into World War II. And if you're ever interested in doing some research, I did research for this. When you research the Jewish News archives from the 40s, it's so amazing to see advertisements for bakeries and for clothing stores, and right next to it is these horrible stories coming out of Germany. And it was such a juxtaposition to have to focus on one thing and want to read all these other things. So it's a great thing to Google. That U of M has archived all the Jewish newses, and even before it was the Jewish News, it was the Jewish Chronicle. Yeah. So very fascinating. And even then, the bakeries would open their accounting books to the public to prove to them that they weren't making a huge profit and they couldn't afford to be on strikes. So this 1933 strike ended, and then we moved into the 1940s. In the 1940s, the union had finally come into fruition in Detroit. It was a big union. They were able to strike across the board. And some of the rules that they included in 1943 was a minimum wage. This is the first time there were a minimum wage, a maximum work hours per week, premium pay for overtime in the holidays. I was thinking, you make so much challah on the holidays. I mean, our bakers now, they'll work 18-hour days sometimes on Rosh Hashanah just to get the bread out. They also got collective bargaining agreements, safety and health standards, which were brand new. And also because of all the new equipment that was coming out then, it was, you went from, rolling pins and whisks to these electric mixers. It's so interesting. Some people say to me, even now, they'll be like, oh, don't you do this by hand? And I'm like, oh no, we have a machine that helps, roll it out. And they're like, oh, well, you should do it by hand. And I'm like, You know, in the 1920s and 30s, I really don't think that they were like, oh no, we don't want a mixer. We'd much rather mix all that dough by hand or knead it all by hand. But actually, it's funny, we still knead everything by hand. It's really hard to find a machine that will like knead and hand make, you know, rye breads for you or braided challahs for you. All that is still done by hand. So that was the 1940s. And I'm going to jump ahead a little bit, but even into the 60s, the bakeries were having huge issues. In the 1960s, I was speaking to a gentleman who owned Jewel Bakery, and he was telling me that the local Jewish Teamsters, the Bakers Union, teamed up with the Jewish Teamsters, and they were paid the same amount as the auto company, the big three auto company workers. And they finally went on strike to make sure that they had even better wages. And there were shots fired outside Jewel. They said no one was hit, no one was hurt, but the police were called. And there was shots fired and violence, you know, as recent as the 1960s. So, and it wasn't just the unions and the bakers who wanted changes made. Even the Council of Orthodox Rabbis, they had created rules where all the bakeries had to be closed on Shabbat. All the bakeries had to be closed, even if you weren't kosher, had to be closed the entirety of Passover. And if you started baking like before 8 p.m., before Pesach was over, like you couldn't sell your food. And they would stake these rabbis outside, even non-kosher bakeries, to make sure that they complied. And they were so afraid that it was our duty to you know, they're trying to create Israel, and our duty to the Jews overseas, and after World War II, to be reminded to be Jewish, and it's very important to follow these rules. So I thought that was very interesting, and I can't imagine there would be an outside force telling, you know, today a business when to open and when to not open. But it was really interesting to see how people differentiated their recipes. So now we're getting into people wanting to do their own twist on some things. And I thought it would be kind of cool to start with Kichel. So Kichel is a kind of a poor person's treat, came out of Eastern Europe. It's oil, eggs, flour, a little bit of salt, a little bit of sugar. That's actually in the Kichel. And this was something that they could travel, you know, I mean, this is good Kichel. This is made today Kichel, and you can hear it. It was a very crunchy treat. And it didn't cost a lot of money to make. So
I have never made Kichel in my whole entire life. I've made a lot of things, but I've never made Kichel. So we thought it would be fun for Stacy to teach me how to do it. So we have what we're calling the Kichel cam this evening, and I'm going to scooch it over a little bit so that it's more kind of where our hands, I think, will be. And we're going to try and not get too much flour everywhere, but she's going to teach me how to make Kichel.
So actually what's really interesting about Kichel is there's very little sugar on the inside. So the sugar is more on the outside. And if you look at old Eastern European treats, a lot of them are oil, flour, water. Oil, flour, like a lot of them, it was plentiful, it was cheap. Oil, actually, there's a lot of people who grew berries and other types of fruit, and especially in Russia, they were able to press their own oil. So my father's family tells us they called it bay mill, and they pressed cottonseed oil. And it was great because you could then make anything you wanted. You could have a couple of chickens, you could grind your own wheat, and you could live on your own. And these people who lived in these rural shtetls, that's exactly what they needed. So the fancy part about Kichel is there's very little sugar in it. So what you would do is instead of rolling it out on flour, you roll it out on sugar. And they would roll it out on sugar, even though sugar was expensive then, you'll see, you don't get that much sugar, and then they would just use the sugar. So we're going to show you what we need. So we're going to give you all the recipes for these, and I just want to give you a couple little tidbits. Is you mix all your liquids until it almost is like, doesn't quite form a ball, but it'll get really kind of just the eggs and oil will kind of get very thick. And then you'll put your flour and vanilla in slowly, and it'll start to come and form a ball. And then once it's in your mixer, you want to let that mixer run on high for maybe 15 minutes because you really want to like almost knead it. So we're just gonna, you can go ahead and push that down. And then,
Should I put some sugar on it?
I'm actually gonna sprinkle.
Wow, you are kidding with the sugar.
Yeah, because you know what? Just a little teeny bit of it goes in.
Right. Well, and you were telling me too that they started adding butter to this recipe, but really it started out as part.
Right,
So that
well,
it could
right.
be used for
That's
whatever,
actually
right?
rugula.
Oh, okay.
This is still part. This is just boiled water
it's
flour.
part. Got it.
So the thing about kichel is you don't want to roll it out thin. You're
Okay.
going to keep it thick, like I would say almost like a half an inch thick. And if you notice, like I'm just rolling that sugar in, and you can just keep throwing it on top of it. So you can just roll that out just a little bit more.
Sure, and I'm gonna just scooch this over just a smidgen so that people can see.
Oh, I'm sorry.
No, it's not you. It's my here.
Our kichel cam.
Yeah, our Kichel cam.
Which would be the rugula cam.
Yeah, it's gonna be the rugula cam in a little bit. Okay, there we go. I think that's good. All right, so about half inch.
Yeah, like even 3/4, half inch.
It's
You
very,
just don't want to
very elastic. It's the word I'm
Yes, it
looking
keeps
for.
wanting to shrink
Yeah,
down.
it does not want to stay where you want it to go. All right, how's that look?
That looks beautiful.
Yeah.
That will work. And so what they do is, you know, then you can start brushing it off, and then they would just lift the sugar up and put it back in the bowl. So
Wow.
really, they just really used very little sugar. It's sweet, but there's actually not a lot of sugar in it. And you can use a pizza cutter, you can use a knife, whatever you have. We're just gonna slice it in a few strips.
You know what I'm surprised about? I'm surprised at how dense the dough feels, but yet when you pick up a baked one, it's very light.
Right, it weighs,
It's not what I would have expected
Right,
at all.
exactly. It just poofs up. So then you're gonna go like this, and then you want little rectangles. And you can't always get little rectangles, because you'll get these little pieces on the side, and that's fine, they bake up just fine. And
So about, what, an inch, give or take, inch and a half?
inch and a
maybe?
half, like inch, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna pick it up.
Okay.
Pick anyone up, right? You know, it's got sugar on both sides. I'm trying to do it.
That's
so
right,
they
yours
can see it.
is better, the angle
Is
of
this
mine,
me?
so go ahead. Yep, that's it.
Oh, look at that. And then twist, and you're just gonna make little bow ties.
Okay, I'm gonna try over here. So take it, pull it, and twist it.
Yep,
And then you have to
kind of
pinch it in the
squeeze,
middle?
yep, just a little teeny squeeze,
Well, it
just so
might
it
be a little
stays
bit
over.
much.
That's okay. And then you just stand around,
So you guys
Really?
still do this all by hand?
all by hand.
Oh my goodness.
There's no machine that makes kichel yet, but we make a lot of kichel. And if you have ever bought kichel, it doesn't weigh very much. So you get like these huge bags, you know, and it's like a pound, and it's like this much kichel. But it's great. It's a very mild puff pastry. It's just a homemade puff pastry. It's kind of cool. I can break one in half for us.
Oh, yeah.
And
Look
you
at how
can see
light
like
it
how
is.
airy and light it is in there.
Yeah.
And also what's interesting is if you leave the dough out too long, and an important thing is you have to let the dough rest for at least an hour before you start rolling
Does
it.
that develop a little bit of gluten in it?
Yeah, I think so. Yep, it gets that elasticity to, you know, like this we made this morning,
Mhm.
and we immediately put it in the freezer because it'll turn green. I
Really?
don't know why. Yeah,
It'll turn green?
It'll turn green. I
Whoa.
don't know why. Nobody. I mean, someone can feel free to Google it, but I have no idea
My goodness.
why it would turn.
Something oxidizes
I
in
guess
it.
so. So,
Oh.
like you're seeing, so like all of these just have the littlest of dusting of sugar on it, and then they would just, and just like, yeah, I got my giant bowl of sugar here, and they would just put it all back, and you can use it again and again and again, and you can make whatever you need to make out of it.
So how many of these did your bakery make? I don't even know what to ask you, whether it be daily or weekly or, I don't even know.
We probably make Kichel every other day.
Okay.
I'm trying to think. So I probably have like 20 pounds of it here, and that's a quarter batch.
Oh
So
my
we
gosh.
probably make 80 pounds every other day.
Wow.
And we're
That is
one
a
of the only bakeries that still makes it. And what's really cool is we'll make it young, like a more youthful version. We'll dip it in white chocolate and roll it in Cocoa Krispies or
nice.
Sweet Pebbles, something like that. And it's really pretty. So you can get them in little tiny sizes. If you want to do like just little teeny ones, but they really bake up nice and they poof up. So you get something that went from this and is that then, and it'll turn into that. And it'll really,
So
really
cool.
tell the difference.
You
but
can.
It'll just poof up.
So were these mainly a
So
dessert?
Stacy,
Yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
Stacy, a question has come in about what kind of sugar you're using. Is this sanding sugar or just regular granulated sugar?
Plain old granulated sugar. You're going to find in these like old Jewish recipes. There's nothing fancy about it. It's your plain old granulated sugar. Yeah, same sugar you would use in your cookies and your tea. Yeah, just regular old sugar. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah, and
Can you re-roll this? Because, some doughs you can't re-roll. Can you re-roll this or not? Like some pie crust you can fuss with and re-roll it, but maybe not.
I don't think so because you know what? Once you've sugared it, so once it has the sugar on it, you really can't re-roll it. Because when we're training people to do it, it's really common when you roll your dough out, you roll your edges thinner because you're pushing down and out, and you really have to push down and up. So sometimes if someone rolls it too thin, we just have thin Kichel. And those are the crispy ones. And then we make, the Kichel boards, which you'll just take a big chunk of Kichel and roll it super flat in a giant circle. And some people just like the skinny, crispy ones.
Oh.
So for those people, and then some people just like the puffy ones. And it's pretty hilarious. People are very particular.
How cool.
Well,
Well,
but it's a great treat, and it makes a ton of them. And you can feel free to give it a try at home.
yeah, this is awesome.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like I at least have a general idea of how to do this now, which is awesome. So people, you said it's a treat. So what's your favorite way to eat?
Oh, I like Kichel just with a cup of coffee. It's just, I don't know, it's not too sweet. It has a hint of sweetness, but it looks like you use so much sugar and you really don't. I think there's only in the whole recipe, there's a tablespoon and a half of sugar.
Wow.
In the entire chunk of dough that we have here, a tablespoon and a half of sugar. So really it just has that dusting on top and it's a nice treat that's not too sweet. And I keep saying I want to go visit my daughter's Jewish club at her high school and bring Kichel to a new generation because it's delicious. Yeah.
Oh, cool.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to let you continue on with your history,
Okay.
but should I put these on a tray while you're talking a little bit?
Or that would have been good if I had brought a tray.
Maybe, Dan is in the house.
Ah.
He's sort of our man on the, Johnny
Man
on the spot for us.
Perfect.
So maybe he could grab us a cookie sheet and
Thank you.
I'm going to reshare my screen and and then I'll help put them on the
And,
cookie sheet for
one
you.
more thing I want to say about Kichel is that when they were made so long ago, it was a treat that really didn't go stale. When I first bought Star, I pulled some Kichel aside and I waited 3 or 4 days, maybe even 5 days. And then, when we had another batch come out that day, I tasted them. I could not taste the difference. And this goes to show you is back in the 1800s when they were eating this, you didn't have refrigeration, you didn't have saran wrap, you couldn't. And actually, putting this in Tupperware or saran wrap will actually make them mushy and soft. So you would go somewhere and someone always had a bowl of them out, and they will last for 5 or 6 days and be absolutely fine.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that's what they're built for.
That's amazing.
Thank you.
Of course.
So Stacy, while you are finishing up there, a couple more questions for you. What's the baking time and temperature for Kichel?
Great question. So it's 350. And it's about 20 to 25 minutes for a small batch. And the most important thing, and I always say we never bake for time, we bake for color, is you want the bottoms, I don't know if you can see, the bottoms to start having a little bit of color, and you don't want to be able to twist them. So sometimes it could take up to 30 minutes. You know, if you have a convection oven, it might be a little less. So you want to really look for the color on the backside, and you don't, I haven't talked this long in a long time. And if you don't want to be able to push it down, it shouldn't have any give to it. And then we do have the entire recipe, and it's super easy to make, and it's really fun to make it with kids too, if they want to make it. I remember my daughter used to play in the sand, sitting on the kitchen countertop, and she would just play in it and play in it. And then finally I had her, I have one. Finally, I had her lick her fingers, and she had no idea. It was very, very cute. That was you, Izzy, if you might be watching.
Aw. So just so you know, Stacy has been very generous, and both the recipes that she's going to teach me how to roll and wrap, she's going to share with you. So when you get the recording, you will also get the recipes for these two wonderful delicacies. So don't worry too much. You'll get all the instructions, but at least you'll know how to do the proper turning of these and rolling of these, and it'll be great.
Yeah, you're just going to twist them into little bow ties, and they'll pop up and do their thing.
All right, I'm going to share my screen again so you can go back to a little bit more history.
Okay.
Stacy, is there any difference between the Kichel recipes for the two bakeries?
No. Actually, all the Kichel is made over at Star and delivered to Diamond. We have deliveries here between 6:30 and 7 a.m. every single morning. So, nope, it is the same recipe at both stores.
Do I need any left out for the next recipe?
No sugar, no.
Okay, to make that.
So this is a funny thing this time. I thought this was very interesting. For World War II, when World War II was coming on, another way, not only, no wholesaling and wasting meat, is they had all of these rules about helping the war effort. And the big one was no double bagging. And I don't know if you've ever come into the recipe bakeries, but people love to have their stuff double bagged. I don't know why. I'm not 100% sure it's really keeping it double fresh, but people love their stuff double bagged. But it was illegal. You were not even allowed to ask for people to double bag. And so these are a list of the Jewish bakers that were cooperating and listed their rules to help the war effort, and that they weren't going to be buying back breads anymore, and that you had to really take care of the cost of, I think it was just paper and wax paper back then. That was the only way you could get it, but even then they weren't allowed to double bag, and I thought that was very interesting. Okay, so after Kichel, it comes to World War II. So World War II, we're coming into the 50s, and Star Bakery opens in Oak Park. And it's kind of interesting because we really don't know. There's all this information about when Star Bakery opened. There's advertisements saying now open, another famous Star Bakery, and that's our address on Coolidge. We must have had a 9-mile Coolidge at one time. But what's interesting is they say that we opened in 1954, but everything I found in the Jewish archives said that we opened in 1957. So I don't know if there was a change of ownership during that time. I'm not sure if there was, just a delayed grand opening. But I just thought it was very interesting that there's really no solid history on a lot of these things, and our only timeline is ads that people put in the Jewish news. There really wasn't as many deep dives, happy stories about bakeries and small businesses like I feel like our Jewish news has today. So that is, we think, the very first ad that we saw for the Star in Oak Park. And even our oven, which we still use 7 days a week, was built, well, the repair people say in 1954, into that space. So she is a
mystery.
workhorse. It's a mystery. Excuse me. But what we do know is sometime during the 50s, so now Star had several different locations, sometime during the 50s, it was owned by brothers and they broke apart. And what happened is one set of brothers started the fabulous Star Bakery. And it was kind of unusual because they literally opened up one at 10 in Greenfield, and we were at 10 in Coolidge, or the first one was at 10 in Coolidge. So there was a separation of the brothers. They started opening their own ones. And from what we understand is the brother that had the fabulous Star Bakery, he was an advertising and marketing guru. And he was really, at one point, there were probably, I think, 7 fabulous Star Bakeries. So I think we might have, right, okay, so this goes back to yet another boycott that there was, talking about now the bakers really wanted to have more of a life. I don't know, maybe I mixed this up because 1937, but they were saying that they are going to be closed now at 9 o'clock. The owners tried to be open till midnight. There were some places that would sell onion rolls or rolls like every 2 hours. They would just constantly be putting them in and taking them out, and you could come anytime. So this was a big deal to close at 9 o'clock. And it was just for the Jewish bakeries. So it was that Jewish Bakers Union that really took hold in Detroit and finally started making some headway into becoming a strong union. So coming into the 50s, we're going to do rugelach now. And rugelach is an interesting story. So when it came over from Russia, it was again oil, yeast, eggs, and flour. That's really all it was, and a little bit of sugar. They had it that way because you could have yeast wherever you are. If anybody made sourdough during the pandemic, like you know that you can just make a starter. You can make yeast wherever you are. You need a little bit of water and a little bit of flour, and in 5-6 days you can have bubbling yeast and make your breads and pancakes and rugelach. And when rugelach came here and it was being made like that, now that we're post-World War II, the reform movement's really taken off. People really poo-pooed that old-fashioned rugelach, which, by the way, is the most popular rugelach in Israel now. Like if you go to Israel, all you get is the yeast rugelach. They call the cream cheese rugelach, American rugelach. So now that the rations were over from World War II, they could have butter. There was, cream cheese was plentiful. This was kind of like the rich people's treat. So now we're getting something that was very poor, like Kichel. This is now a very high-end treat. And I have to say, rugelach to this day, with eggs and butter prices, is probably one of the most expensive items that we make, even at the bakery today. So, ready to make some?
I'm ready. I'm gonna just put up I didn't change the name, try not to get my keyboard too sticky, but I'm going to add our now rugelach ham.
Okay, so rugelach.
Right, I'm ready.
You're going to have this recipe also. And what's really interesting is it's just a stick of butter, which is 8 ounces, 4 ounces of cream cheese, and then flour and just a hint of salt. That's all it is. There's actually no sugar in the rugelach dough. So we're just going to use, actually this time, I'm going to use some flour. And I'm going to let you roll that out.
Okay.
I'm just going to press it down.
Get some of the
Dough.
sugar off of it.
No problem.
How thin or thick am I making this?
Then you can go thin. Now I
Okay.
had that little screw.
Oh, it's here.
Oh, okay, perfect.
So like
So,
really thin?
yeah,
Okay.
you can go thin with rugelach. And what's really nice about the rugelach too is you can fill it with anything you want. So I have all your traditional fillings here, your apricot and cinnamon sugar, raspberry, and little teeny tiny chocolate chips, like the little mini ones. And if you want, you can also just melt some chocolate chips with a little bit of oil, and it'll kind of like help keep it nice and soft.
We could use Nutella too.
Oh, that would be fantastic. Absolutely. Okay.
All right, how's that looking?
That looks
Good or
beautiful.
too thin or?
No, that's great.
Okay.
So what we're gonna do is we're gonna do it 2 ways.
I have to say, I wish you guys were here and you had smell-o-vision, because this actually smells delicious. It's not even
Like
baked,
cream
and
cheese.
the dough smells so good.
Just a big ball of butter and cream cheese.
How bad could it be, right?
How big could it be? So what we're gonna do is it's very traditional. Again, you can use a pizza cutter, you can use a knife. I'm just gonna round this out, and like if you don't get a full circle, and this is one of those recipes that you can like pull your extra bits off and then re-roll it and keep going. So we're actually gonna do, we can do a little piece of this with I'm just gonna kind of egg wash a chunk of it, and then you can sprinkle cinnamon, so this area will be sprinkled. And then you know what, we'll make this part chocolate chips.
Okay.
And you can put, I don't know if I had finished, but you can put oil and chocolate chips together and kind of make a paste, and that'll help kind of keep it soft when it bakes. Otherwise, the chips just
How
kind of
heavy-handed
stay
should I be on?
as much as you want. That's the beauty of it. And then uppercut.
So I assume the
Raspberry.
egg wash just kind of helps everything stick.
Correct. And so, and another nice thing is, you can always make a whole circle of cinnamon, and then a whole circle of chocolate chip, and a whole circle, and just keep going until you don't have it. And you don't have to make big circles. And then there's even a way to do it where you don't make circles at all. So we can make we can make like a triangle. Or you can do this.
Well, that makes sense because you only need the egg wash where you need it to stick.
Exactly.
Okay, I get it.
And then you know what? I will put these chocolate chips in here. Yum. And some people like nuts and raisins because that's very traditional, is the nuts and the raisins.
I once worked at a synagogue in Illinois, and ironically, they would have a sale every year, but they actually talk about an ecumenical project, they actually hired some Mennonite women to make the kichel, make the roa. So I always thought that was kind of funny that
Wow.
they weren't making it, but they were supporting 2 organizations by doing it.
So what we're gonna do is we're just gonna cut these little triangles, and then we're gonna cut our triangles, and this will be like your cupcake. So you can cut these however you want, and then I'll show you the speedy way there's a whole nother faster way to do it if you ever want.
Okay.
Do you wanna, sure, just keep going.
Yep.
And then you're just gonna take these and roll them up. They're so cute.
And you start at the fat end,
Yep,
right?
you can start at that end. Now, we make a lot of rugula at the store. So we do not make it like this because this, like the kichel, would take a very long time. So we try and save a little time where we can. They're so cute. And then what you do is egg wash. I got a couple of these sitting right here. You're just gonna egg wash them. And we're cinnamon sugar. I'm just gonna grab a little cinnamon sugar them. And then you bake these. I am just looking, these are little guys for, same time, 20 to 25 minutes.
I can see why a
Pretty good,
pizza
yeah.
cutter would be very fun.
Yes. You just zip, zip, zip.
So Stacy, a question has come in. Do you have a parve rugula recipe?
We don't. So our rugula recipe is this 1950s, modern version, but I would love to start making the yeast ones. They're a little bit bigger, they poof up nicely, and those are definitely parve. At my old bakery, when I had Marty's Cookies, we made the yeast ones there because that was this was grandma's recipe. So we were making those there. And I think we were charging like $7 a pound for them, and she just couldn't believe it. Her rugula was, money maker. She was so funny. It was never a money maker, but she was very sweet, so we did that.
So I imagine with the egg wash, it gives them a little bit of a shine. too.
Little
It makes them pretty.
shine, yep, and the cinnamon sticks to it. Beautiful.
Does this dough need to be refrigerated before you bake it?
Yes, thank you for reminding me. Yes, actually, you should always let, just like we let our pickle recipe rest, and that is in the recipe, you want this to rest before you put it in the oven. And you have a choice. You can let it rest as a whole before you roll it out, or you can roll it out, make them, and then let it rest, which I find it much easier. It's hard to roll it out when it's cold. So what we can do is we can put these, and I'll show you the super speedy way that we do it at the bakery. So if you ever want to make a lot of them and you don't have a lot of time, we're just going to make it in a rectangle, and you'll be very surprised. Like most of you probably already know, it'll just go a lot faster. So we're just going to do this one more time. Here's our flour. So what we do at the bakery is we cut them in squares. And the squares are usually exactly the size of our cutter, so it's super easy to cut, and we're just going to do that.
I assume we try and keep it consistent.
Yeah, just kind of square, rectangle-ish. Rectangle's fine.
I have a old rolling pin that was a gift to me when I turned 10 that a gentleman made out of cedar wood.
Wow.
And I don't use it very often because he put my name on it. And so when you use it, it puts your name on
Oh,
it.
it's one of those imprinted ones. Those are really
Yeah.
cool. I'm a big believer in use what you have. You know, you have nice china or something handed down from a grandma. It might break, but at least you were using it while it broke, as opposed to it falling off a shelf one day.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's really nice when we use the things that our loved ones used.
I think you're going to tell us later about your family's cookbook and how you use that too.
Absolutely. So
All right, how's that looking?
that looks beautiful. So again, this is like a modern 1950s, the reform movement, again, differentiating themselves because they didn't have to just have carved desserts. They were very proud of the fact that they would have Milford's dessert. So what's your favorite? What do you like? Cinnamon, apricot,
apricot.
Okay, me too. So we're just gonna take this whole thing. We are just gonna,
I can help.
yep, smear them.
Whoops, got a couple of chocolate chips in there. We got
Yes,
we got a
wow.
combo for this one.
And you can take these home.
Oh goodness. Thank you.
And perfect. And all we have to do now is, you know what, I'm just gonna put a little bit more because I'll start at the bottom so they can see it. Okay, is we're just gonna roll it up.
Okay.
And you just wanna roll it nice and tight. Yeah. And we wanna go about 3 or 4 rolls. Yeah, that looks good. And then we just give it a little pat.
I heard someone
Slice
say
it.
something, they were measuring and they said something about, you measure that with your heart. It was something about chocolate or something like
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Like you measure that stuff with your heart.
So this is if you don't have the time and you just want to get your rucola in the oven, and you can even, you know, just give it a nice
Right?
smear, and you can do this before you cut it or after you cut it.
And then
Sprinkle it,
sprinkle and then you're good.
And you're done.
So if
Yeah,
you're making a lot, there you go.
right.
Cool.
And then they look like this. And then again, same thing, really important to let them sit. Because what happens if you don't let them sit, they fall over in the oven. And every once in a while you come in to Star or Diamond and you see they look like little pinwheels.
So you bake them. That's a good point to remember. You bake them actually the way they're sitting on the board here, not on the side. Like
Exactly.
Okay,
Exactly. You're
got
just
it.
gonna go like that.
Got it.
And they're just gonna kind of shrink up. So they'll sit like this for about a half an hour.
Cool.
And you don't have to refrigerate it, just let it sit and then put them in the oven again. So you let your dough rest and then you let your formed rucola rest and then throw them in the oven. Yeah, so while you're doing something else, you can do that.
Well, thank you so much for teaching me how to do
You're
this.
welcome.
I always wanted to
You
know.
actually make
I'm
rucola
sure I
one day.
will. I'm sure I will. I'm sure I will.
All right,
Okay.
let me
Have
go
on
ahead and switch out our
arugula and Kichel cam here. And
Stacy, a couple questions for you. First, what's the best-selling product at the bakeries?
So each bakery has their own best-selling products. At Diamond, hands down, 7-layer outsells everything. 7-layer is fantastic, and one of the things we can talk about, and I was just about to get into differentiating how people differentiated their recipes when things got more modern, is Diamond 7-layer is very different than Star 7-layer. So Diamond's #1 seller is 7-layer, and I think at Star, the bread, so our rye bread, pumpernickels, sourdoughs, our multigrains, our challahs, they are second to none. And our challahs, more traditional. It's not like the super sweet challah, although we have made it sweeter just because that's where people's tastes are going now. People like a sweet challah or sweeter challah. It's not like a super sweet challah though. But yeah, it's very interesting. And yes, we saw a lot of Star 7-layer. So we always encourage people, like, it's kind of fun. We had someone come in the other day and they came to Diamond and they bought a half. And then they came to Star and they bought a half. We were going to a dinner party and they were going to do a blind taste test.
blind taste test, see if they get through.
You can't pick. It's like picking your favorite child. You can't pick.
So you alluded to earlier some of those great ads by the fabulous Star Bakery. So here are some of those ads, if you want to talk about them a little bit.
So they're hilarious. So they started something called the Kibitzer, and he, like, I don't know, it was just like, this was a new form of advertising. And you could almost see them, you know, they probably weren't sitting like madmen in a Detroit office somewhere, but they were probably sitting in the back of the bakery because they were probably, you know, didn't have the margins to go hire a big advertising firm. And they were just coming up with what they could come up with. And I think one of them was like,
Yeah.
if you want something done, ask
Yeah, it
your
has it on
secretary.
here. It says, if you want something done quickly, give it to a busy executive. He'll give it to his secretary.
Because, you know, that's great for the bakery business. It was just very unusual, but fabulous Star Bakeries who were related to Star Bakery, but then went ahead and opened up different locations. And if you look, I think some of them might even say, like, you know, no, we are not affiliated with, you know, Star Bakery. We are our own thing. Right?
Yeah, it's on the one on the right. It says, note, our 2 locations are, and it gives the addresses. We have no connection with any other bakery bearing our name.
You know, even though they opened afterwards. So it was just kind of interesting. But listen, people loved it. And it was the exact same, except they had the all butter vodka, which again, like a lot of big things about vodkas, it's a parb. You know, originally it was parb. It wasn't supposed to have butter in it, but they were famous for their all butter vodka, I guess. Yes, a little before my time. Excuse me. So, in some of the ways that they differentiated themselves is through the 7-layer, and also even things like the pumpernickel. Pumpernickel has a cute little story. So, pumpernickel is just a darker rye. So all it is. It's a rye bread with more rye kernel in it. And so what happened was, is in about the 1920s, people started making, you know, people still come into Diamond or to Star and they ask for a dark Russian rye. They want the dark black Russian rye. And I almost don't have the heart to tell them. All they did was, there's no sugar in rye bread. So what they would do is they would boil down some sugar until it got really dark and add it into the dough just enough to make it a little bit darker. Because the rye, with the extra rye kernel in it, automatically came out a little bit darker. But if you wanted to be known as the better, darker rye, it made it seem like yours had more rye taste to it, they would just put in the caramel color into it.
And then you say some of them even started using commercial caramel color?
Yeah, exactly. And then it became commercial caramel color came out. So now it wasn't a sugar, it's just a coloring. And I mean, I don't think I'm giving away any big secrets, but that's really all it is. It's a rye bread with extra rye kernel. But, you know, the guy down the street made his darker, so now I have to go out and buy, you know, caramel color to make mine darker. And then the guy 3 doors down goes down and makes his even darker than that. And that's how dark Russian pumpernickel started. It was just, had extra rye in it, and it was just a little bit darker. And we even have some customers who call and ask for a light pumpernickel. And a light pumpernickel is without the caramel color, and it just has that extra rye in it. And it's, just a little bit darker than a regular
But the flavor
rye.
is identical.
But the flavor's the same. Yeah, it's hilarious. And people are so insistent that they have that dark black pumpernickel. I'm like, okay, it's, same thing almost, but this has a little bit more rye kernel. So that's one of the ways they differentiated the 7-layer cake. So for instance, Star makes a very traditional 7-layer cake. It is which was originally called the Dobosh tort. It's the 7 sisters. It came from Hungary. Very popular cake. It's 7 thin layers of yellow chiffon, chocolate buttercream, and then a chocolate ganache poured on top. That's it. That's exactly what it is. So that's exactly what Star makes. Just a light yellow cake, chocolate buttercream, chocolate ganache. Now what happened is in the 1960s and 70s, when the next migration to West Bloomfield happened, people started looking for things that were more exotic. Now we were getting pineapples from Hawaii, and you had all these new exotic flavors, rum from the Bahamas, and cherry flavoring, and there were all these commercial extracts that came out. So if you come to West Bloomfield and some of the more modern bakeries, and Diamond started in 1977, you'll see that they use more flavored extracts. So that's one way, is they have a flavored extract in their 7-layer, and that's why it tastes so incredibly different. And you love the 7-layer that you grew up with. And it's very unusual, but that's really the only difference. It is a yellow cake with extract, with chocolate buttercream and a chocolate ganache on top. And some ganaches are a little bit darker, a little bit lighter, but that's it. And that's how they were able to make that change. So I'm trying to think back. And it was also interesting with Diamond Bakery. It was originally owned by a Polish family, and they really did their best to keep up those Jewish traditions. And they did it by putting their own twist on things and doing things just a little bit different, and it turned out beautifully. So that brings us to today. And I'm a firm believer in the fact that food really does bridge the generations. It's so great to see adults come in here with their kids saying, I used to come here when I was a little kid, and I used to come with my Bobby or my grandma here. And there's so few places like that left, and I really think that Jewish bakeries very much have that ability to be here for our community. My kids will say, Mom, whatever happened to that place that we used to go to when we were little? I'm like, I don't know, it's a chain, it's long gone. But places like Star and Diamond, and even, Siemens and Bake Station, they have been in our community a long time, and it really does bridge the generations. So for instance, my dad is telling us about cottonseed oil and how his family was able to eat on where they lived, and my husband's grandmother teaching me how to make gefilte fish. And I have to say, one of my most prized possessions, I think we have a picture of it. Yep, I brought it with me today, is for my shower. My sister made me this little teeny cookbook, and all it had in it were maybe 5 or 6 recipes that she did in her beautiful calligraphy. And she said, the rest of the book is yours to do. And the rule is I make something more than 4 or 5 times, and it's a make again, we call them. It goes in the book. And you can ask any of my kids, if the house burns down, what do you grab? And they all roll their eyes and say, we grab the recipe book. Because I have put there's handwritten notes, as you can see, Bubby Bessie in 2002, and she passed away not long after that. She's the one who taught me how to make the gefilte fish. She's the one who taught me how to make the notes. My mother had an amazing apple kugel, which some people call a strudel and some people call a kugel. We don't know. My mom called it kugel, we're calling it kugel. But it's those recipes and keeping those recipes alive and making those recipes are just really special. And I think one of the things we're going to do in Star and Diamond anyways, is it's not just Ashkenazic, your Eastern European recipes. There are a lot of new recipes we're trying. We're doing tahini brownies. We're making, I had to write down, we're making cheese barekas, and now we're gonna start next week, feta and spinach cheese barekas from Israel. They're like Israeli hand pies. We're doing, I really wanna start making, it's called, I don't usually say it right, kubanya. It's a Yemenite sweetbread that's made in a pot. So I'd really like to make that also. So we're really trying to go to all the Jewish cultures, like, you know, embrace the Sephardic recipes. We're a Jewish bakery. We don't just need to be, you know, just an Ashkenazic bakery. We need to keep all the traditions alive. So I think in Michigan, the Jewish bakery future looks great.
So we have a little bit of time for some questions. So if you have a question, if you want to go ahead and put it in the chat, Katie's going to monitor our chat for us. I know there was at least one question already, so I'm going to step over to the computer. But Katie, if you want to go ahead and let us know what questions, I know you covered a lot of them in the process of the presentation, but if you have any that we haven't covered yet, please feel free to let us know.
So Stacy, what is your current relationship with a Bakers Association or the Bakers Union or even the Orthodox rabbis in the community? What are your relationships with those organizations today?
So that's really interesting. There's actually no more Jewish Bakers Union. I think it folded in the early 80s where, you know, I think that's when even the automotive unions kind of went downhill and had to make a lot of concessions and because of the recession. And I think it really just kind of fell apart. And between that and automation that came in, those bakers really realized, you know what, they didn't have the job security they had. So it's unfortunate, but there is no more Jewish Bakers Association. And there also used to be a Jewish Bagel Association. And interesting also, there was a Jewish Bialy union. And that's why you never found a Bialy in a bagel store. So like New York Bagel, I think it's New York Bagel is one of the only places where you can get a Bialy in a bagel store. You can do it now because the unions are gone. But those two unions used to only be Bialy stores and bagel stores. And now you can get them anywhere. And the Jewish councils have realized, you know, we use butter in our bakery, so we would be considered a Milchix bakery. Some of our products are parov, like you saw the Kichel's parov, Mandelbread's parov, but I don't know if we need another kosher bakery in the industry. So we've talked about it, but I don't know. So right now there is no relationship.
So one of the things that came up too, and it goes along with the whole Lador Vador and things like that, is that you actually have working still at Star and Diamond. You want to tell them some about the length of time some of your bakers have been with you? Or with the company rather,
right.
Not with you?
So we have at Star a living legend, Marilyn, and she will watch this when it comes on YouTube. I'll make her watch it at work one day. She's still working for us. She is, well, let's just say, I think she started working in 1957. She's 14 years old, maybe. And her father owned the shoe store down the street. And so she was able to get a job. And she has worked on and off since then. And you could ask her anything, and she knows everything about it and where things go and how things used to be. And she's all excited about the new changes, you know, and that the future is looking bright for us. So she was very happy to see us come on board. And even at Diamond, we have some employees who have been with us for 20 years. And, you know, they don't want to go anywhere. Once you get into the bakery business, you realize there really is a passion for it.
Well, and you shared with me that some people, when you bought the bakery, have said, oh, well, you changed this recipe, and you've actually had to go and get the person that's been making it for a decade to say, no.
It's like, no, We haven't changed the same person making the 7-layer at Star. It's the same guy. He is still making it. He gets so offended when people say, that he changed the recipe. I'm like, okay, it's okay. We'll just let him know. But people think because there's new owners, that something, everything's changed. And everything hasn't changed, but some things have changed. And I'm sure I'm waiting for like the great onion roll controversy.
Oh, yes. You should talk a little bit about it.
So when we came to Diamond, we didn't change anything in the beginning. We wanted to see how everything worked and understand it. And they had a very unusual challah recipe. Again, trying to differentiate themselves, in the 70s and make it more modern. And they just serviced this store. So they were just making product for the store. So if they would make 1 or 2 dozen onion rolls or New Yorkers, they chopped their onions and they used a different formula for the challah that would support all that moisture. And the big chunks of onion, it wouldn't sink. So at Star, we supply many, many delis with rye bread and our onion rolls. So for us to hand cut onions, we really have to use dehydrated onions, and we'll get a 40-pound bag of dehydrated onions. They're just literally 5 feet tall. So
you're it's as big as you are. I'm going to step back into the screen. So it's as big as Stacy is, and of those dehydrated, what would that be the equivalent to?
It's probably
theoretically
close to 400 pounds. They say a pound of dehydrated, because it's a mince cut, is about 10 pounds of onions. And so you use a little bit, you put it in a bucket, you soak them in water, they will burn your eyes. They really are just cut onions. And again, dehydrating food came from when our ancestors came over. They couldn't bring fresh vegetables. They couldn't bring, fresh even carrots and onions. Everything would rot, and potatoes. So they learned how to dry their food to make it last and to be able to use it in other recipes. So for us to hand cut, but the big news is we're going to bring back small batches of those diamond onion rolls because there's such a demand for them, and New Yorkers, and we're going to just make small batches of them. We're going to start it once a week, and if it goes, we'll just,
and do a taste test.
Right, exactly. Oh,
a blind taste test. Can you tell the difference?
People will know. People have, I've gotten hate calls because of our onions. Very touchy. Jews are very protective of their food and
traditions.
Of their history and traditions. Yeah, it's very,
absolutely.
We're trying.
So,
Stacy, you were talking about some of the longtime employees at both bakeries. How about the equipment? What's the oldest piece of equipment that you still use?
We have a Kaiser roll machine from probably 1943. It holds 2 rolls at a time, and you put your 2 little pieces of dough in it, and it moves it, and it squishes down, and it makes that little Kaiser roll. And when it breaks, and it does, we have a little thing that has that little twist, and the guys just have to make the little twist in the Kaiser rolls. But it's hilarious. I thought, when first time I saw it, I'm like, does this work? It's back, and they're like, oh, we use it every, we just paid $500 to repair it. I'm like, oh my God, yeah. And in our ovens from 1954, that steam oven, that's an amazing piece of equipment. But yeah, we have some old, pretty amazing. The old equipment works great.
Yep. So I noticed in the chat, someone asked if you ship anywhere. Are you allowed to ship any of your baked goods anywhere?
Yep. We are actually starting to ship 7 layers, and I really want to get. There's no rye like ours. So our starter. So rye is it's a sourdough. Sourdoughs don't contain commercial yeast because they couldn't. They came over. You would literally just capture bacteria in air, and that was your yeast. So our rye starter we think it's about 60 years old. That's how far we can trace it back to. It might be older than that. There's some sourdoughs in San Francisco. There's a sourdough company, and theirs is I think from 1880 or something like that. So to keep that alive, so that is why the Star rye bread is such an unusual heavy rye flour. And we're very protective of our water, and the water has to have the right pH balance.
Because it'll
to
kill
keep
the
that.
yeast, right?
Right, it'll kill the yeast, and you have to add, things in certain orders to kill it. Bread baking is hard, but yeah, so we really want to start making it known that we're going to really put our foot forward to start shipping. And also I want to say is even these challahs back here, so the new challahs are just like your regular braided challah. I think I have one. Like just a little regular braided challah everybody has. And that's because, again, in the 1950s, when things got modern and everybody started having bar and bat mitzvahs and the big parties in the 50s, you got your big braid and they just wanted to be different. But this one over here, I don't know if you can see, this is a 5-pound challah, like for a bar and bat mitzvah or a wedding, and it's called a 5-3-2, and it's a 5-strand braid, and then there's a 3-strand on top of it and a 1-strand in the middle, or a 2-strand in the middle. So it's a 5-3-2, and it's very popular in the 30s and the 40s. It was more about your strand work than it was just about
Again,
like,
with the aesthetics, right? The color of the food, the shaping of the braid.
Right.
I love it. So someone wanted to know about your cookies. We've obviously, so here's a question. I have two.
Thank you.
Are these considered cookies?
Yeah, ruggles is considered a cookie. Absolutely.
Would Kichel be a cookie?
Kichel, we consider Kichel a cookie. It's like a little pastry. But I think they're thinking about so I used to own Marty's Cookies. Yay, Marty's Cookies. Loved it. Love Marty. And so we have brought back Stacy's Cookies now. And, it is a delicious butter cookies. And actually, we just started last week carrot muffins. So, and the sugar-free graham muffins. So I'm bringing back some of the old recipes that I used to have at the Birmingham store here. So yeah, they're here. And now they're Stacy's Cookies. Wonderful. Sounds weird, but
well, Katie, any other questions that we might have missed in the chat?
We have some 7-layer cake questions, Stacy. First of all, are you willing to divulge the flavoring that's added to the diamond recipe?
It's not a secret. It's really not a secret. My partner's like, no, don't tell. I mean, I really can't. I think everybody knows, but it's really, it's so unusual. I think if it almost ruins it because people always like to try and guess. But it's cherry.
Well, maybe we should do this. Since I'm going to email all of you the recipes, maybe we can hold a little tiny competition, and you can email me your guess for what it is, and maybe she will be kind enough to not tell us publicly, but maybe she will tell you privately. How about that? Dan, does that have your approval? Okay. He's like, okay. So
I don't
send me, when I send the recording out, send your guess for, I'm flipping door everywhere. Send your guess for what it is, and she'll confirm or decline whichever it is.
And we tell customers who walk in the store all the time. So, I come on and buy something and think, want to make sure I'm not allergic. What is that? We tell you. It's kind of fun, though, not knowing, because then everybody's always so stunned. It's very funny.
Wonderful. All right. Anything else, Katie, on checking the chat for us?
Is there a pound cake consistency version of the 7-layer cake?
Or does it have a consistency?
It's pretty much just like a yellow cake. The diamond is a little heavier. I think it's a little more dense than the star one, but no, it's not a pound cake. It's more just like a yellow cake. Diamonds is definitely a denser consistency than the lighter cake at Star. But I would say that, it's the way you make it, it would be hard to do with a pound cake. It's such a heavy cake. It would just kind of smush all the layers down.
Couple people asking what happened to the pastry dough hamantaschen. Are they coming back?
The pastry dough, the yeast hamantaschen. Yeah, so we do the yeast hamantaschen for Purim. It is our big yeast hamantaschen time. Really, if you want it, it's just our Danish dough with made into a triangle. So honestly, you could get a cherry Danish or an apple Danish or a raspberry Danish and fold it in a little triangle, and that would be your hamantaschen. But we do make them in that triangle shape just for Purim. So yeah, Purim is March 8th this year, I believe. So we will have them for the weeks leading up to it for sure. Those are,
Goldie says, tell us about the donuts.
oh, the donuts, and Punchki Day's coming too. Yeah, so we're doing filled donuts. We're making our donuts. We try and have them on the weekends right now. It's hard. It's like with the bakers, it's hard to make everything every single day. And then when it doesn't sell, you can't sell a day-old donut. So we try and really have those Friday and Saturday to have the filled donuts, but those are delicious. Yeah, the donuts are great. We have,
What are they filled with?
Oh, raspberry, lemon, Bavarian cream, chocolate. What else? Cherries too big to pump. I'm trying to think of what else. There might be one other fruit one. What? Custard, Bavarian cream. Yep. Yeah. Oh, I know. They're so good. I like the chocolate. And Punchki Day is February 21st. So if you're looking for a party, you come to the bakery at about 2:30 in the morning, and we're filling thousands of donuts.
Oh my goodness.
And the only difference between a punchki and a soufgagnotte is soufgagnotte have powdered sugar on top, and punchkis are glazed.
So do you make soufgagnotte
Yeah.
during Hanukkah? How cool. And then someone else I noticed mentioned Mendel bread.
Mandel bread. Yep.
Mandel bread.
Mandel
I
bread.
misspoke.
Yeah, we have mandel bread. It's actually my husband's grandma's recipe. It's Bubby Bessie's mandel bread. It might be Grandma Sadie's mandel bread. Bubby Bessie's bagua. And that is just like oil, flour. And I have to say, I have yet to find a different mandel bread recipe. Everyone says my mandel bread is different. Oh, but I'm like, you add the third cup of orange juice. Like that's the only deviation I've seen is some people add orange juice. Some people might use milk chocolate chips, but really like, honestly, they're all the same. It's how you make the recipe that really makes it different.
Well, I think we've got all the questions, unless we missed some. Katie, how did we do?
We did great. Somebody wants to know, what's a New Yorker?
Oh,
What's a New Yorker?
Yeah,
Oh
what
my
is it?
God.
Besides someone who lives in New York, what is a New Yorker?
Besides someone who like is a part of the controversy. So a New Yorker actually comes from New York. It's challah bread. It's thin crust on top. It has onions on the outside and onions on the inside. So you have your onion roll, which is onions on top, and then you have your New Yorker. And what I love to do with the New Yorkers, I slice them sideways, open it up, I'll push it down a little bit in the center, butter it, and then crack an egg on top and bake it for like 18 to 20 minutes.
Oh.
And we eat them at the store, and it's a little salt and pepper, maybe a little hot sauce on it. Oh my God, it's such a treat.
Oh, that
There's
sounds.
so many unusual recipes. Oh, you know what? I wish we even have something called a pretzel, and that is a piece of challah that's rolled out paper thin, and it has onions on it. And people use that people just like cream cheese and butter. My daughter likes it to eat it with shakshuka. I like it with scrambled eggs and tzatziki sauce on top.
Oh, yeah.
And some people use it as a pizza board, or with like cherry tomatoes and feta cheese. Oh my God, those
Sounds
are really
delicious.
good too.
Sounds wonderful. Well, I am so thrilled that Stacy was willing to do this program for us. She did such a good job. She put so much work into it. So you don't know this, Stacy, but when we do a program, we can't really applaud because you can't hear us, but we use the International Sign Language applause. So if you enjoyed tonight, go ahead and give her a round of applause. I see you can see some people waving their hands at you and turning on their cameras. So we will have your recipes to you within the next week and the recording of this program. And of course, if you have any questions, feel free to let us know. And don't forget, she's going to let you guess what is in the 7-layer cake.
That'll be fun.
So that'll be a fun little thing to have. I can't wait to get all these in my inbox. But thank you all so much for joining us tonight. It was our pleasure to put on this program, and we hope you really, really enjoyed it.